Welcome to Ask Dr. Doreen. As I said, we have Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh here with us, and she's got some very fun hair going on
Yes,
today.
I do, yes.
I love it. There are not very many people who can pull this off, right?
Well,
but you can.
Well, I just, when I travel, especially when I travel to humid places, it becomes just too much work.
I hear you.
And so we just came back from, of course, our company retreat for manager level, so the supervisors and the operations managers. So there was about 400 people with us on a cruise to Mexico, and of course, I had sort of a very messy hair there. And then part of the whole thing was that everybody in Mexico, a whole lot of people were getting their hair braided, so I decided to do it, and it's going to last me now a few weeks.
I love it.
Yeah,
I absolutely love it. I think it's divine.
Different.
And I get it because I have hair that I keep it really short now because otherwise I look like a bush woman. If I walk by something that's moist,
Oh, yeah.
it's just crazy.
Yeah.
So I can understand. I could never keep my hair as long as you do. I would stop traffic because my hair would be in the way. So we don't want to do that. I want to say though, for those of you that are new to the show, Dr. Granpeesheh is a true expert in the field of autism. She has now been working in this field for 40 years. We can officially say it's more than 40 years. I know she doesn't look it, but there it is nonetheless. And has been working with individuals all across the spectrum of all abilities, of all ages, from very young babies up through senior citizens. I know some of you write in and say, but what about, adults? And she has a vast amount of experience working with adults as well in all areas. And one of the things that I love about her the most is that she really gets it that this is a community and that there is a family who is standing in solidarity with this individual and that everybody has needs.
Absolutely.
And I also love that you look at the individual that is on the autism spectrum as an individual and as a whole person, that it's not just what's happening because autism is a part of things, but there are other things going on that may dovetail into the autism but aren't the autism, and you're interested in those things as well.
Definitely.
Where we see a lot of doctors who are like, well, that's autism.
Right.
And end of story, period, and as if you should just accept that and move on, and there's not a discussion to be had, and that is so very not you.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So again, Dr. Granpeesheh is answering your questions. You can write into us on Facebook, YouTube. You can also write in on our live feature. I want to start with, I actually have two questions that were written in, and I'm going to paraphrase them because we want to preserve anonymity. But I have been asked expressly by a viewer to have you talk about how do we help young people, of all ages and all abilities, including people who are nonverbal, to be able to tell when someone has touched them inappropriately.
Right.
Big topic.
Very, very big topic, and very, very difficult topic because it really involves a judgment because, of course, so I guess, so I'm just like trying to solve this as I speak, so thinking out loud really. Yeah. Because it's, even with typically developing kids, you can shape their belief system in a way that will influence what they consider to be appropriate or inappropriate. So, and in fact, in different cultures, different things will be appropriate or inappropriate. That line moves, right?
Well, even with age,
And
because
with age,
if
of
a
course.
baby walks up to you and puts their hand on your breast, that is a vastly different thing than if someone who is 45 walks up to you and does that.
Absolutely. And the reverse true as well.
Yes.
So like a little girl might be walking around in their underwear and that's totally fine, whereas an adult, of course, can't do that. So all the rules change with age, with culture, with gender. As much as we'd like to say they don't, they do. So, no, you don't see women walking around taking their shirt off in the heat, right? So there's a lot of differences. So I think it's easier to, instead of trying to teach all the rules, I think it becomes more relevant to teach the rules that pertain to that particular individual given that particular age and circumstance. So let's say if you are dealing with someone who is 6 years old and a male, and what you would like to teach them is going to be very different than what you teach, let's say, an 18-year-old female.
Yes.
And so, and also let's assume that this is in our culture here, but even if you look in the US, there are liberal areas and very conservative areas, and there are culturally different beliefs and religiously different beliefs. So everything we teach has to be appropriate to the family. Mm-hmm. So first thing is that the person teaching, I think, should identify what the rules are. You know, is it okay for some, how, you know, what are the things that are fine and what are the things that are not fine? And really then when it's black and white like that, you will teach that.
Okay.
And so we have, you know, let's say as an example, like, and you have to break this down into extreme detail. So what I would do is I would probably start with 2 lists, which is like the things that are okay and the things that are not okay. And then each of those lists will probably divide multiple times. So what is okay for someone else to do to me if they are male? What is okay for someone else to do to me if they are female?
Okay.
And then each of those will break further into what is okay for, let's say, the female to do to me if I know them versus if I don't know them. And then that in itself will break into, like, so a prerequisite for this would be, we have a lesson called Levels of Friendship. Yeah. So I think that is very important. And that lesson teaches our child how to differentiate what's appropriate for someone who's a, let's say, very close relative to a stranger, all the way to a stranger. So a friend or an acquaintance or someone my parents know and a stranger. And so there will be certain things that are just not okay no matter who it is, right? So
of course.
Body parts that cannot be touched by anyone else. Mm-hmm. And then there are, unless they're like helping you wash it, and then there are only these particular people. So, you know, very, very clear rules.
Yeah.
And then there are things that are okay for some people and not others. So for instance, let's say someone helping me get dressed might be able to help me do, you know, put together my underwear or whatever, my bra, or let's say that sort of thing. But someone that is an acquaintance or a stranger or, you know, not one of these people is not allowed. You know, let's say an acquaintance might be allowed to touch me on my hand or perhaps at most on my shoulder, but not anywhere else, you know. So it's a process, and it's very difficult because, you know, these teaching, and Evelyn always speaks to this, it's easy to teach our kids or our adults black and white rules. It's not so easy when you try to teach them gradients, you know, and like judgment calls. So this is one of those situations where it's just very, very difficult to teach the person to make a judgment call. So I would, and it's scary, to be honest with you, because the child might, or the adolescent or adult might actually say something that or like might misinterpret someone's intentions and get that person in trouble as well. So we want to be very, very careful about this particular issue and try to just help the individual just adhere to a certain number of rules.
But it's extensive, and I'm having a coughing fit. Let's take a break.
Let's take a quick break. We'll be back.
And then we'll be back.
Hey guys, for the month of September, I figured I'd show you guys how to make a task completion chart to help your kids get through the hardest parts of the day. Parents have been writing into our host, Shannon Penrod, the hardest parts of the day are waking up in the morning, after school, and getting ready for bed. Please keep in mind you can always modify the task completion chart to focus on the skills that your family needs most. The template we'll be using today to make the task completion chart you can find at facebook.com/autism-live. Alright, let's get to it. The materials you'll be needing are the template, cardstock, scissors, hole puncher, glue, pipe cleaner, Velcro, and photos or images. We find it more reinforcing for kids if you use images of themselves doing the tasks that you're trying to get them to complete. So what I have here to start off are photos of myself doing all the tasks that we're going to add to our task completion chart today. The first step you're going to be doing is printing the template from facebook.com/autism-live. I have it here, and the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to trim at the top. We don't need that, that's just totally excess. Now that I trim my 3 templates, I'm going to label each one with a different part of the day that we're focusing on, such as waking up, after school, and getting ready for bed. Now that I finished labeling the templates with the appropriate time of the day, I'm going to attach the photos that go with it. For bedtime, the tasks I chose were getting ready for school, putting away toys, putting on pajamas, and brushing teeth. Now repeat this for all the rest of the day. Now that I've added the photos to the template, I am taking this along with my heavy cardstock to hold all my tokens. I'm going to line them up and make 3 hole punches. I'm going to take this pipe cleaner and attach the pages together with it. We're almost done putting this together. Next, I'm going to take my Velcro, I'm going to put them underneath each picture. And then I'm going to add 4 on the very edge too. Now that I've attached the rough side of the Velcro to the template, now I'm going to take the softer side and add these to the tokens. You can use whatever you want for the tokens, whatever your child finds reinforcing. They could be stickers, images, spacemen, Pokemon, whatever they like. Before you use your task completion chart, it's really important that you do a preference assessment to see what your child finds reinforcing that day. Once you have that established, then you can tell them the rule for how this task completion chart works. So every time they get one of their tasks completed, they add a token to it. And the way the task completion chart functions is like a token economy. So after they put a token under each one of these tasks, they can trade it in for their reinforcer for the day. Now that you've made your task completion chart, hopefully your child will be able to use it on a daily basis and help them through those difficult times of the day. Well, until next time, craft on. Bye, guys.
Can you see me flying by your side?
Just go like this. Can you see me? Puedes mirarme aquí? Okay. Hi, I'm Rebecca Ishida. Say hi, Ethan. Hi. My son was diagnosed with autism in November 2004. With Ethan, almost immediately, we noticed things that were troublesome, that he just didn't sleep. He would vomit in the crib. There were a lot of sensory issues.
Then he'd have like 20 of the trains lined up, and if you came in and took one train out, just meltdown completely.
Guttural instinct is to think that there's nothing wrong. Who wants to look at their child and go, there's something wrong with that child? You don't. You always want to see the best in your child.
Will my kid be able to go to school? Will he interact with his peers? Will he be able to have a healthy relationship? Will he get married? I really thought that autism was like a death sentence. A lot of hope was given to me through CARD. This was my 3rd agency and the best agency we had. And there was no way in the world I was going to give up CARD because of the gains I saw Ethan was having.
Yeah, you did it!
And I remember when Doreen saw us for the evaluation, she says, but by the time he's 6, he will be recovered. And that's exactly what happened.
I'll fix that.
Welcome back. I've got a cough drop. I swear that I have allergies, and there's like every once in a while the air conditioner will turn on and there's just like a little fuzz ball.
Yeah.
And I breathe with my mouth open and I inhale a fuzz ball. TMI. Let's get back to business. So when we were last with you, Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh was talking about the many things we have to consider when teaching an individual what is appropriate versus what isn't appropriate in terms
Right.
of, it's not a black and white thing. It's a really hard thing, not something you would expect to teach in a weekend. It's probably something you're going to take the rest of your life and work on. When I look at the gradations of just looking at the Me Too,
Yes.
all the ways that adults who are not on the spectrum have different criteria for saying, you know, this is appropriate, this isn't appropriate. When we watch people's reactions to, you know, how people react to allegations against people, it's been very enlightening, I think, for the world to see.
Right.
So if it's that difficult for adults who aren't on the spectrum and who are able to do perspective taking, then what would it be like for our kiddos
Exactly.
who are on the spectrum and perspective taking is maybe not their thing? So you mentioned a lot of things. I loved that you talked about a lesson in skills called Levels of Friendship, because I think that's a great place to start, and it's useful for other things.
Definitely. Definitely.
So it's not just about teaching what's appropriate, but it lays the groundwork for, you know, them to have an understanding of other things. But I want to also hone in on, once you've started to teach these things, how do you get someone who is nonverbal to report it?
Yeah, so, and there's one other thing I want to mention
Okay.
about this, as you said this, because I think a lot of parents when we teach our typically developing kids this particular thing, we often tell them something like, tell us if it doesn't feel right. Anything that doesn't feel right, you should report. And I just want to make sure parents realize that I don't think that instruction works with our kids on the spectrum, because I think the things that don't feel right are very different for our kids.
What a great point.
So don't try that as an instructional technique, like telling a child report what doesn't feel right if it's a child on the spectrum will be quite different, I think, because our kids have a very different sensory regulation process, right? And I think a lot of things don't feel right to them.
Right.
Lights, sounds, touch might actually feel right to them. So, you know, holding and hugs might feel good to them. So that's probably not the right way to go.
Good point.
Yeah,
Great point.
so that's one thing. Once you've identified the rules in terms of just the people and what is the people and the location, right, of the touching and the type of touching, perhaps. Once you've done that, the question you asked now, Shannon, is how do you report that? And I think, like anything else, for even for our nonverbal children, nonverbal adults, let's say the most severely affected by the spectrum, you know, it's a matter of just teaching a particular sign or icon that is representative of alarm.
Okay.
And really, that's all it is. So it doesn't matter if if it's possible, obviously, to identify the alarm and the picture of the person, that is best. But, you know, most important, I think, is to just start by teaching, you know, if any of these rules are broken, like if it is someone who is, let's say, you don't know them and they've touched you in a body part that they shouldn't have, then indicate by going to a trusted person, right, a family member, and showing the sign for an alarm.
Wonderful.
And that's really all you can do at this point.
And in the Levels of Friendship, I think what a great, and I wanted to make sure that I mentioned that that's available in Skills.
Yes, it is.
And you can go to skillsforautism.com to see more. There's also a whole safety protocol in there that I think is really critical for any parent of any child on the spectrum to go through.
That's right. It just is a process. You have to. It takes a while to teach your child what it means what a stranger means, as opposed to someone who's an acquaintance, as opposed to someone who's a friend. Like those things we have definitions for, and Skills talks about that a lot more. But it is a long process. It takes quite a while.
There are so many shades to it and so many different ways that it interconnects. So, but it's important to get started.
That's right. You know, I have to say that, like, for us at CARD, one of the safety is such a critical thing for us. And so, you know, until you are able to do this, I would say, as a parent, we all worry about where our kids are, what are they doing, regardless of their functioning age or whatever it is. We all worry about our kids, right? If you have a child who has the level of severity of the disability is so strong that you're worried that they could be in some way harmed and not even tell you about it, I really recommend that you look at all the technology that's out there. You know, at CARD we have cameras in our clinics, and we're adding more and more cameras as we can afford it, because we feel the more cameras we have running live in any all of our hallways, rooms, everywhere is more important, is very important to the safety of our kids. But you know, nowadays you have body cams. Like, you can easily purchase a camera that your child can have on their body, like literally as on their belt at all times, or you know, those types of things are very, very possible. If your child goes to, let's say, or if your adult goes to either a school or a day center or something, just have a camera installed that is facing your child, and you can receive notifications. You can drop in. Just here's the easiest: is get an Alexa and plug it in wherever your child is, and log into the wireless, and you can drop in on your child anytime.
Yeah, yeah.
And
I mean, you have to get the place to agree to it, but you know, I always had the feeling as a teacher, I always said, my door is always open.
That's
Anybody
right.
can walk in at any time.
That's right.
And, you know, I would say to parents, come on in. Because we're not doing anything here that anybody can't come and
That's
see.
right. That's right.
And if you have somebody who is really opposed, for me, that's a red flag.
I agree. I think, well, sometimes people just oppose things without giving it any thought, just
Yeah.
because they're so rule governed themselves.
Yes.
But I agree. If you can't convince them, if I were you, if someone doesn't give me permission, I would either look for another placement, or if I can't find another placement, I would actually go get a spy cam.
There you go.
And I would put it on my child. I mean, there are pens that
Yes.
that are running, that are recording the entire time.
But of course, I have to give the legal disclaimer now that we're not recommending that
We're
you
not
do that,
recommending
because
it.
that might be illegal where you are.
Yes.
But we're just saying,
You know, it's
hypothetically,
funny.
if it
That's
were
right.
us, we might.
That's right. I just, for the protection of my child, I
There's
would
nothing
want to
more
make sure.
important.
That's right.
There's nothing
And it is
more
very
important.
suspicious if someone says, no, you're not allowed
No,
to.
you're not allowed
It's
to.
the same as when I always used to say it's extremely strange to me that schools only allow people in for 20 minutes at a
Oh, I
time.
know,
It's
it
like,
drives me crazy.
why do you even need to know when I'm dropping in?
Somebody has written in and said, do they allow body cams at school? And I think it's very likely that in every state that they don't, quote unquote, allow them.
Ask. Why don't you ask? You should ask.
But I will say this, that there have been many parents who have taken the step because they weren't sure about the safety of their child, dropped
Yes.
the tape recorder in the backpack, which was illegal.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, I need to know if my child is okay.
Yes.
And I'm not recommending it, right? But I'm saying I completely understand why, you know, and I might be in jail later on for something like this related to this, because I could see myself doing this going, I need to know.
I need to know if my
They
child's
drop,
safe.
they
Yeah.
drop the recorder in and send the child off to school. And then what happens is they hear what's happening and they take it to the school board. Now, you can get charges filed against you for breaking the law, bringing the tape recorder, but the bigger issue is that the school has a problem. If
I'm
you get the
not-
recorder
you know,
back
and
and everything's
honestly-
fine, nobody would ever be any of the wiser, right?
Yes, but also you have to, I think these laws are all changing, because everyone has this, right?
That's
and
right.
everyone who is able to can just hit video and record whatever around them. In fact,
Yes.
think about the number of people who are in the background when you video anything.
Exactly.
So privacy has become a whole different thing now. And I don't know that, I'm pretty sure the rules regarding this are changing very, very rapidly, because
Yes.
of course the companies that own these kind of body cams and videos, cameras and phones and so on fight for the right to videotape what's going on around you.
Absolutely. So, you know, but I think right now, ask, but I think it's pretty safe to say that schools that they do have a policy against body cams. But
I actually don't know.
But I don't know what I would do or not do to ensure that my child was safe and not, so there we have it. But not recommending that you do anything. Legal disclaimer. Okay, I want to move on to the next question. We had a mom who wrote in and said that she's got a teenage daughter, and that the daughter is obsessed with watching Elmo videos and watching videos of kids that are screaming and having tantrums. And she thinks that she's addicted to it, and she said, help, what do I do to get her onto something that's more age appropriate, or fill the need some other way that isn't quite so not age appropriate?
Right. So I would, there's, I don't know, several thoughts. First is, always as a behaviorist, you have to ask yourself why. What is the function? So what is she getting out of it? And this might be very hard to figure out, but I would test it. I would see if it's the sound or it's the visual. Which one is it that's intriguing her more? Whichever one it is, let's assume it's the sound. If it's the sound, it's perhaps and maybe that's why also Elmo, I don't know, because Elmo's voice is very high
pitched, yeah.
Maybe she's seeking out a high pitch type of thing, I don't know. But if you could find an alternative that is a little bit more appropriate, perhaps very high pitched music, perhaps different types of music that sound more to us like screaming. Like, I have to tell you, there are, obviously I sometimes I'll listen, like, you're changing channels and you'll come across like a hard rock or one of those like metal or something channels, and it sounds like someone screaming, right? Yeah. So that's music. Okay, so I don't know if any of those types of things would be an appropriate replacement for the child.
My son went through the phase 2 years ago where on YouTube what he was watching was the goat screaming videos. Have you seen these?
Yes.
Where they take a song where it gets really high and they cut to a goat screaming for the notes, and we all would just laugh our heads off. It's very much a teenage thing.
Yeah.
I wonder if that would be thrilling. It's
Exactly.
annoying though.
Yeah.
After a while, it's
absolutely.
very annoying.
But so the concept, regardless, whether it's something that preferably it's something that provides the same satisfaction to your child. So it has the same function, let's put it that way. If not, you just pick something that is otherwise satisfying. And there's always things in life that are high rewarding and low rewarding, right? So this particular thing right now that you want to get rid of, whether it's, be honest with you, the Elmo is more appropriate than children tantruming, right? Watching children tantruming. So I don't know if it's the same person asking this question.
It is.
So I would probably eliminate children tantruming altogether and try to replace it with other types of things that have the same function but are more appropriate. Having said that, the way to do that is to it's like feeding. It's the same thing where you give a small amount of the unpreferred object and then reinforce it with a large amount of the preferred object, and over time you reverse that. So in this case, what you would do is you would have your child first actually be required, in order to watch Elmo, let's say, or in order to watch the tantruming children, she would have to watch, let's say, 1 minute of something appropriate first. So 1 minute of something that you choose, followed by 5 minutes of something she chooses. And then over time, you change that and you make it 2 minutes or 1.5 minutes of yours and 4.5 minutes of hers. 2 minutes of yours and 4 minutes of hers. And you do this very gradually over time so that the child becomes satisfied with maybe, when you get to a point where you're at 5 or 10 minutes of the good thing for 1 minute of the annoying thing, then you start to skip the annoying thing and go every other day. And gradually it becomes that she's actually watching more of the appropriate things. But one of the things I have found really important, Shannon, is, and that's the PREMAC principle, is
Right.
using a reinforcing thing, that you want to eliminate actually as the reinforcer. But the thing that I found is that our kids, a lot of our kids, are highly, highly reinforced by being able to search on YouTube and look at different things. And I feel strongly that they should have the right to do that. I feel like our kids all do that. We do that.
Yeah.
I think it would be, but the appropriateness of what's on there is very important. So it's really important to have someone with them scanning through things and just immediately deleting or eliminating or moving to the next thing if you come across something inappropriate. I was always I'm still worried about that because my kids are all over the internet and they're not kids anymore, but still, you never want to see something horrific,
Right.
and there are some horrific things out there. So that's basically the only thing. But if someone can accompany the child and let them scan, I'm pretty sure she'll find other things that are more appropriate as well.
And there are ways on the phones and on the iPads that you can set general limits for some things that they can't find. It's not going to catch everything. And then there are ways that you can set specific websites that they will no longer be able to get into.
Very easily done. The other thing is, because both of the things you mentioned have sound associated with them, I'm thinking there's something, she might be seeking out a particular pitch of sound, and it might be that is the sound that she hears the best. Don't forget, our kids are very selective. Some kids are very selective in the sensory input. So it might be something that she's seeking because of that selectivity.
So you get a little Guns N' Roses music and see if she likes that.
Metallica.
And Metallica. Right. And there we go. Things that I don't like because I don't like that. That's a whole other story. But let's take a break, and then we're going to come back with more of your questions that you guys have been writing in on YouTube and Facebook. Stick with us. Parent to parent, you might be asking yourself, how on earth can I afford ABA therapy for my child? Well, the short answer is you can't. No one can. It's really expensive and it's overwhelming to most families. But the story doesn't end there, fortunately. The first thing that I want you to think about is tapping insurance resources. So many insurance companies are paying for ABA therapy right now. So that's your first best bet. Make sure and see if your insurance company is providing benefits for ABA therapy, and check back often. Now, if you see that you don't have insurance right now for ABA, don't panic. There are still other resources. The next place to go is to your local support groups and ask them what local resources there are. That's a great place to ask for information because often states and even counties have support for ABA. And then beyond that, you might consider applying for grants. There are many fabulous grants out there to help you to get support for your ABA therapy. But most important, it's absolutely essential that you get ABA services for your child. We know that that's essential for all of our children, and that you won't be able to do it on your own. So seek out those services and support groups that will help you to fund your ABA journey. It's really important to remember that all behaviors happen for a reason.
Hello, fellow activists. Last week, I introduced you to step 5 of the 10 steps to empowerment, shore up spiritually. Let's talk more about finding ways to do that, how to find out what lifts your spirit, feeds your soul, and make it a practice. That practice is different things for different people. It could be the practice of meditation, of prayer, of community worship, or serving others. But it's the practice that will give you hope and faith and strength for the journey ahead, for the marathon journey of raising a child with autism. I get inspired every day by the families of children with autism that I come into contact with, like the parents of the nonverbal child who have not given up hope that that child will speak one day, or the grandparents who should be enjoying their retirement but instead are joyfully raising their adult grandchild with autism. or the mother who is fighting for services for her daughter while her Marine husband is fighting a battle to keep our country safe. They all inspire me. My grandmother, Diddy, who is an angel who still guides me every day, had this quote inscribed in her Bible. I sought my soul, but my soul I could not see. I sought my God, but my God eluded me. I sought my brother, and I found all three. I think I'm finally starting to grasp the meaning of that. So feed your soul, lift your spirit, and until next time, keep the faith.
Welcome back to Autism Live and to Ask Dr. Doreen. We're here with Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh, and she is answering your questions in real time. We had some questions that came in on YouTube specifically for this one. Hi, how often do you see hyperactivity in autism? My son is 4, 5, going to ABA 30 hours. Now I've got it. Lately, I feel like his hyperactivity is more of a challenge, especially in public school.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So how often do
Very
you see?
often.
Very often, right?
Extremely often. So it is a very common thing that we have ADHD going on at the same time as autism, and it's very hard to diagnose because obviously autism overrides ADHD. So once you have the autism diagnosis, no one's paying attention to the fact that your child otherwise would have an ADHD diagnosis. So yeah, hyperactivity is super common. Sometimes it's at the point where it's very, very difficult to get under control, and we then would recommend medications that assist in getting it under control. I mean, I know sometimes parents are very much against medication, but you know, throughout the entire course of my education, every disability, no matter what it was, whether it was ADHD, anxiety, depression, you name it, whatever it was, the research shows that the best solution is a combination of medical and behavioral. It always is. Mm-hmm. So in some cases, the hyperactivity is controllable, right? So if your child is under control and able to sit and pay attention during the 30 hours of ABA, then it tells us that he or she is controllable and that the school staff need to be trained better, or he needs to have a one-to-one shadow with him. If he's still also extremely hyperactive during ABA, then I would really recommend that you talk to a physician and try to look at supplementing with some ADHD medications that might help him calm down a little bit.
And I always like to throw in there that dietary, get as organic as possible because of the pesticides. We already know, the studies have shown that pesticides, even a small amount of pesticides can exacerbate ADHD behaviors.
Definitely, and particularly the pesticides, food colorings and additives, sugar. There's a ton of stuff in our diet that influences our activity level, for sure.
And I know people don't like that and they get uncomfortable when I say that, because none of us wants to have our colors and our sugars and all these things taken away from us and be relegated to an organic diet. There are people who think this is the end of the earth and they might fall off. I don't mean to make fun. But the example that I always give is go to a birthday party where there are kids that are typical.
Yes.
And because I've done this many times because my kid couldn't have cake, and you're there at the birthday party and you're seeing the kids all interact with each other and they have all these capabilities and they're having such a good time, and then we bring out the cake and the cake has all this artificial food coloring on it and it's not organic, and everybody sings, we cut the cake, and everybody's extra happy.
Yes.
And they're showing each other all the colors on their tongue, and everybody is so excited because everybody's in the sugar buzz. And set your watch for 15 minutes and watch it turn into a nightmare,
zoo, followed by exhaustion and
people
tantrums
hysterical and crying, and everybody and it's like the timer goes off on the party and everybody disperses and goes home.
True.
But you could have the cake at the beginning of the party and the same thing would happen because their little bodies can't handle that much sugar and color and pesticide. Oh my goodness. Okay, off my soapbox now. Should we take another break?
No, we're good.
Okay, we're good. Okay, so another person on YouTube said, how to make my 5-year-old to be more talkative and have a back and forth conversation. He only mans and labels. And we hear this a lot because a lot of people are doing a lot of speech therapy, and those speech and language pathologists, they'll work on the manding, they'll work on the labeling, but it's like they don't know how to get to the back and forth.
Yeah.
I will say skills, but
I mean, that's really the answer, because, we can't assume that a child will start to develop the skills involved in conversation just by learning labels. There's a ton of stuff they have to learn, and it's not just I'll just give you examples of what we do in skills and in our curriculum. You start with labels, obviously, and labels are great, but then you will need to go on to action items, so verbs, and then you will definitely need to teach more content, which are things like attributes, so all the big and small and this and that, and then you need to teach other types of adjectives, like all the colors and sizes and so on that can be thrown in, and then you need to absolutely fix the tenses and teach the correct past and future tense, and then you need to make sure that all of the prepositions are in place and the pronouns, and after you've done all of that, you could just form a very basic sentence. And even if you're at the point of forming a pretty basic sentence, with direct object and placement and all of that is correct, you still don't know all the nuances that are involved in social behavior, which have to do with how do I go back and forth, how do I stay on a subject that others are interested in, how do I listen, actually, instead of just plan the next thing I want to say,
right.
How do I repair a conversation if other people start to walk away, how do I enter a group of people and introduce a conversation. I mean, there's a million things. And these are all lessons that we have broken down and individually detailed in skills. And so really, I would say go to skills, because there are numerous steps. And skills is pretty good. I mean, you would be going into either both the language curriculum and the social curriculum, because conversation really starts to go into the social curriculum. And you just need to follow the order of things, because there's a ton of stuff that you have to teach, and labels are just step one.
Here's the thing, though. I think I remember when we started ABA therapy, and I say this all the time when I'm talking to therapists, that I was all gung-ho. I had met Logan Shepard, and I saw how amazing he was, and I was like, I want CARD, and I want therapy, and we are about to embark on this fabulous journey. And then they came in, and very quickly I saw Touch Car, and I went, Touch Car? Is this what I signed up for? I want him to go to college. Touch Car? Yeah. How are we going to get to college from Touch Car?
Yeah.
And I was incensed. And I hear parents all the time at events, they go, oh, I've seen videos of ABA therapy.
I don't want
robot I don't, exactly. I don't want somebody going, touch this.
Yeah.
And this very, and I think it's such a disservice to ABA that we don't ever. Do you remember in the TED Talk recently, a couple of years ago, there was a guy who got funding so that he could set up his cameras all over his house. His wife was pregnant. They had a baby, and they videotaped and audio taped every single moment of the first 2 years of his child's life.
Crazy.
Then they went through and they found every approximation of when this child said water. And they squished it all together so that you could hear all the approximations from when he went, to wa, to wa, to wa. And it took 1.5 years, but then, and this child, you hear it shape up to where he says water. And it's the most amazing thing. And this is
Absolutely,
a neurotypical
that's
child.
Incredible.
But I wish that somebody could do that with ABA
autism. Yeah.
to show how you get from Touch Car. It's so painstaking.
Yeah.
This whole idea of I sat on tenterhooks the first year as they were going through those different things, and they were saying, right, they would label, and then they would teach categories of things. So they would label, and they would show a picture, and he would say, guitar.
Yeah.
But then we taught musical instruments.
Yeah.
And I remember my mother coming to visit, and I had said to her, you can't come until you're ready to be supportive, because we're doing this thing and I need support or silence, right?
Yeah.
And that was hard for her, but she came and she was like, we listened on the monitor and watched on the baby monitor
Yeah.
from the other room. And she went, oh, honey, what have you gotten yourself into? This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. Because if you don't know, it looks ridiculous. And she was like, oh, sweetheart, I'm sorry. I know I said support or silence, but this is stupid.
Oh my gosh.
And I said, just watch, Mom. And they happened to be working that week on features of things. And I have the videotape. I put it in the show, the Autism Monologues, because it was this whole thing where they taught him a bird, and then they taught him that a bird was an animal, and then they taught him features of the bird, that the bird had a beak and the bird had wings and whatever. And so there's a moment when Peter Farrig sets the bird in front of him, and he says, you know, what is it? And he says, it's a bird, and a bird has wings, all on his own.
Yeah.
He built the language. And my mother was in the other room when that happened, that piece of video, and she stood up and she went, oh my God, it's a miracle. She had been watching for 4 days, and she said, why isn't this on the national news? This is the most impressive thing I've ever seen in my life. It's a miracle.
That's amazing.
But in 5 days, she was able to watch the progression. I think most people don't get to see that.
I know.
And so they go, why isn't the language happening? And we tell them, go to skills.
Right.
But I want you to know it's all these little threads you got to weave in.
Absolutely. And that's why, I mean, thank you for explaining it so beautifully, but that's why we request 40 hours.
Of course.
Because there's so many things that have to come together before, you know, if you go ahead and teach a child a very exquisite sentence, all they're learning is that exquisite sentence and nothing else. They're not learning the formula behind how to generate exquisite sentences. That's what ABA does. ABA teaches you that you have choices, but you first need to you have to learn all the tools. Like, this is what I have in my labels list, this is what I have in my verbs, this is what I have in my features and my functions and my attribute, whatever, and these are the ways I can put them together, and now I'm going to select and produce 100 really good sentences.
And that's why it's not robotic at that point, because you're able to draw from all of those things.
Exactly.
You know that an apple can be 2-dimensional, it could be 3-dimensional, it could be green, it could be red. It could be something that Snow White is given, or that turns into applesauce. You have an understanding of what an apple is in the global sense.
Exactly.
And that's what good ABA teaches. But I think when you just watch a snippet, it's impossible to get that.
That's right.
I really wish that if we could take all of our lawmakers and force them to be in a home where children have autism, 1 or 2, for a week, things would be different. There would be different things granted to parents. And then if we force them to be in an ABA center to see what could be done in the ABA center, funding would change.
I know, it's true. You're absolutely right.
If we could just make them 2 weeks of their time.
I mean, my dream was, and really it hasn't happened. I mean, it has happened that we're able to give ABA so much more freely to people in the world. But ideally, this stuff should be in your classrooms. You know, every single child should be receiving this as part of their education. This is their education.
Well, if we even just taught teachers how to deal with behavior. I'm an ex-classroom teacher, and if teachers understood how to deal with behavior, so much more learning would happen for so many more kids, not just the kids on the spectrum,
100%.
but it's the keys to the kingdom. Okay, I have another question here. My 5-year-old is rigid. Small changes trigger his crying. What to do to help him? Do you want to take that after a break, or do you want to go ahead and take it?
We don't really have much time,
That's
so let's
true.
do that.
I've talked too much.
No, not at all. So rigidity is another pretty common feature. And I think, you know, again, this is one of those situations where we have very specific lessons that are in the area of flexibility, they're called, and they are actually in the executive functioning curriculum of skills. And they are, at first, they come across as a little mean, because what we do is we'll take like the child's favorite toy and change the rules, or favorite game and change the rules, or we'll take routines and we'll change the routines, and then we'll heavily reinforce. Bottom line is, rigidity to me is actually a very meaningful thing, because you tend to see a little bit of anxiety. It's sort of a reflection of anxiety, but it's completely fine. It's nothing to worry about. I mean, we all become inflexible when we are anxious in a million different ways. Whether it's a child who is just going to a new school, so they have a certain anxiety and they won't they'll want a routine. They'll just want to follow orders and not necessarily do anything out of the ordinary, as opposed to the child who has no anxiety and is completely comfortable. And then take that all the way up to like the first day of a job, or you name it. I mean, we do this in all our lives. Whenever we are anxious, we follow rigid patterns. So that's definitely a sign of discomfort or not being familiar enough with the environment, the task, or whatever it is. But it's easy enough to get rid of, because really what you do is, with familiarity, that sort of thing tends to go away. With our kids, you just have to block the rigidity and change their pattern. And sometimes you have to do it a million times. I mean, sometimes our kids will always prefer the same thing. And what you do is you allow it, but you allow it mixed in with other things, and you just don't allow it. It's a breaking of the pattern, essentially.
And I love that you said, in the beginning, it looks like we're being cruel because we're changing the rules on them.
Yeah.
But I want to point out that when people don't do that, and don't do that when kids are younger, then they have the anxiety when they're older, and they don't have the tools. And I always like to remind people that when our kids are learning how to walk, they fall down and they hit their head. And we don't say, enough of that. I'm done. We're not going to teach you how to walk. Somebody bring in the wheelchair.
Yeah.
Because we
That's
know
such a
how
good,
it ends.
good example. Absolutely.
We get through that horrible period
That's
because
right.
we know how it ends. So I think what a gift to our children that we will push
them.
and change the rules, and they will have a little bit of anxiety, but what you're doing is giving them a gift of giving them tools to help
right.
themselves to know, oh, it's okay when you change the rules. And the
Exactly.
longer you wait,
Exactly.
the more anxiety you're going to have towards, the teenage years, and none of us want that.
That's right. And everyone is afraid of change.
Yes.
And so if you do small changes followed by high rewards, that gradually shows the child, I can get through this. I can do this. It's a life lesson as well.
Yes. And even if you don't know if the child can understand it, I think it's good to language that that this is
definitely.
okay. I see all the time when talking to autism parents, I mean, let's face it, I am the queen of anxiety, and I don't like change, and I'm like, I don't like the beginning or the end of anything. I like to be in the middle where it all makes sense, and because it's more comfortable then, right? So I get it. But whenever I'm talking to parents, especially around when the schedules change, everybody's high anxiety because they're getting a different therapist and they have the anxiety from it. And the thing that I always like to point out to parents is the therapist that you love, that you think you can only have now, do you remember the first time they came and you didn't know them? What if the next therapist who comes through the door is that times 2?
It's such a good point.
Right? And then they go, oh, gosh, I'd forgotten that there was a day that I didn't know them.
Yeah. How was your reaction when you first met, let's say, Peter or something?
Well, Peter Farrig was the first therapist that ever came to our door. Okay. And I had this very set idea of what I thought the therapists were going to look like. And Peter has been on the show before, but he's
a pretty big guy.
He reminds me of the genie in Aladdin.
Yeah, absolutely.
And at the time, he had the dreadlocks and and a big gold, pirate thing in his ear. And I opened the door and I was like, they sent the genie from Aladdin. and he was, he was dressed nicely, but he was dressed casually, and he had sneakers on, and he was like, and he was like, hey, and he came into our little condo, and he was so loud.
Yes, he's loud.
And he was constantly picking Jem up and throwing him up in the air because Jem loved that, and he'd be like, dude! And I would go, we're going to be evicted. He is so loud. But of course, within a week, we were like, what have we ever done without him? He was the genie,
So funny.
And the second therapist that ever came to the door was Ryan Bergstrom, and he came because it was before there was a dress code. He showed up in flip-flops and board shorts.
Oh my gosh.
And I literally opened the door. He looked like he was 12. He was 19 or 20, but he looked really young. I thought it was the paper boy.
Oh my God.
And I was expecting a therapist, and I opened the door. I said, it's your therapist. I opened the door, and I said, oh, hi, thank you. No, we already get the LA Times.
You're kidding
and I
me.
went to close the door again, and he said, ma'am, I'm your therapist from the Center for Autism. And I was like, what?
My
They're
God.
sending children? And then he ended up being amazing. I mean, he changed our whole everything.
Yeah.
And really got me to buy in. Although Peter was our personal autism whisperer. But I remember maybe a year later, there was a person who came to observe who was a BCBA, and he came to the door, and I thought, oh, you were what I was expecting. It was a guy in a suit.
That's
And he
so
had
funny.
and he had the man bag that was across his shoulder.
Sure.
And I was like, that's what I was expecting from a therapist. That was
That's
my
so funny, yeah.
my mental image of not these people who got down on the floor and crawled around and
Oh,
took
yeah.
the cushions off the couch and made a burrito out of
That's so
out of the
funny.
cushions with my son, and
Yeah.
that I hadn't thought it through, that they were going to be his playmates.
Yeah.
That they were going to crawl on my floor.
That's right.
And you know what? Can I just say thank God for them and thank God for you? I could just weep. When I think back to
Honestly.
those days and how much anxiety I had, and I didn't know what I had, because you don't know what you don't know. But I'm so thankful every single day
I
for
appreciate
everything that I
Shannon.
got.
I know, it's so
It
true.
is so present in me every day that as you talk through all those lessons of conversation, and I watch my son have those all the time, and I can remember
how
a
he got there.
therapist who sat there and was teaching that thread, and now
It's incredible.
in his life, and it's so very his skill.
It's incredible. I hear you, and I thank you. You're one of the people that always reminds me of how amazing these therapists are, and I appreciate that. But it's true, you never. It's such tiny little things that all come together, and
it coalesces.
And it's over the course of 3-4 years, so you never really get to see how each one will contribute to the next thing, the chain. But when it does, it's just magical. It's amazing.
The first day I took him to junior high, after we had fought, and they wanted to change everything, and they said, kids with autism, our school said we don't believe in inclusion, and we don't put them in the general population, even if they've been in gen ed. And you told me not to do that, not to allow them, because you had prepared him. You said, no, Shannon, we prepared him. He's ready. He can go. And I trust you, but I also was terrified. And I went and watched him on the quad, and I saw all these things that he was doing. It was like watching skills unfold and come to life in my child. And I walked out. I thought I was going to have to be sedated, but I skipped out of the school, and I pulled out my phone, and I started calling everybody that I had the phone number for that I still knew. And the phrase that I said to them was, keep doing what you're doing, because guess what?
It works. That's amazing.
It works.